Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for joining me yet again. We've got a few people joining as we always do, so we're just going to give them a minute or two whilst I waffle. But thank you very much for joining us today. I've got the fun job of talking about a really exciting thing in the form of kind of risks, business continuity, backup, DR, lots of terms that often get mixed together, and it's not entirely clear what those terms are, where their boundaries are, and when's the right time to use backup, when do we need DR, what is business continuity, all these kind of grey areas that I very often find myself trying to define for customers. So today I kind of want to run through those things, but more importantly talk about the risks that are associated with a business, and not all of those risks are necessarily related to IT. And hopefully that becomes clear as we progress on through this presentation. So I'm going to assume that everybody's joined, and obviously, as always, we've got a fairly diverse range of people that I can see have joined, from IT managers to managing directors, and a wide range in between. So we will try and aim this kind of everywhere. So I apologise if it gets a little bit technical in certain areas, and I apologise if it's a little bit too simplistic in others. But hopefully we can meet everybody's expectations a little bit. And remember, obviously, all of these we record. We will put this available online. You can go to our website and rewatch this and share this with your colleagues if you think it's useful. Okay, so what are we talking about today? So it's ultimately about risk. Again, risk to a business or to an organization, but really we're breaking those things down. And what I want to do today is go into some detail around backup, resilience, disaster recovery, and then ultimately business continuity. And those things all kind of layer on top of each other. And of course, as always, there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So hopefully, if you've got any questions, I'll do my best to answer those. But as we talk about that layered approach, let's kind of jump straight in and get going. Hopefully, the beginning of this might be a bit boring. I'm sure many people know what backup is, but we're going to go over it for those that are probably a bit unsure where the boundary of backup is. But we have these concepts. Most people, obviously, a lot of the people on the call today are in the SME world, and backup is kind of a given thing. As most people have a backup solution of some scenario, they're backing up their files and their folders, and they might be backing up mailboxes. But it's those pieces that come on top of that. So we can minimize our risk to our business further by layering in this thing called resilience. We can go even further by putting in disaster recovery, and then ultimately really crowning it off with the concept of business continuity. So what I want to do over the next sort of half hour, 40 minutes is talk about what each of these things are, when's the right time to use the right technology, and how they all interlink with each other, and then a bit of a focus on business continuity towards the end of the presentation. Okay. So if we talk about backup as a whole, again, apologies, I'm sure many of you are very comfortable with the concept of backup, but just to be really clear, what we've done is we've broken these things out, all right? So you understand what the scope of backup is. And when we talk about backup, what we mean is the ability to really kind of take copies and hone in on specific bits of data or services that we deliver within our IT infrastructure. And it's very much owned by the IT department backup. You know, it's run by the IT manager. The IT department check your backups daily, weekly, whenever it is that's required. But it pretty much sits in the camp of the IT department, okay? But it's really taking copies of files, documents, emails maybe, particular servers, so the things that actually serve up your files and your folders. And I appreciate people on the call saying, well, lots of different types of servers, but let's just use servers as a whole. And the idea is it keeps lots of historical copies, which means that if we have an issue, if we delete a file, we have corruption, maybe we get cryptoed, so we get a ransomware attack on our environment, then obviously what we can do is go back several weeks, months, however long we hold our backups for, and pull back our data from a backup scenario, okay? So very, very useful as a whole. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about really is that backup is that entry-level piece. So what we've done is we've asked one of our partners, so Acronis, just to kind of give us an idea. You know, they're playing that backup industry. What are the key things within a backup product? And where are some of the advancements that you can go above and beyond just standard backup as you have today? So if you don't have backup, first recommendation, go and get yourself backed up. Second recommendation, if you are looking at it, let's make sure that we cover off some of this stuff. So as a standard, backup products will cover lots and lots of things. And for the non-technical people on the call, don't worry about the bottom two bits too much. Really, it's those things at the top. It's Windows, something we can probably all relate to as a Windows PC. So what we're talking about is backing up your PC, having a copy of it somewhere else, and having the ability to restore data from it from a month ago, from 3 months ago, from a year ago, to bring data back that we may have accidentally deleted, may have been corrupted, or potentially, been subject to a ransom attack. It's now encrypted. You can't get that data back. You need to go back to a backup to be able to pull the data back. But there's lots of other things in there for the technical people on the call around Azure and SQL services and all these things, which are kind of a standard for any backup product. It gets a bit more complicated as you go lower and you talk about Linux servers and kind of Oracle and things like that. So VMware and Hyper-V and virtualization products. But for the moment, we're sort of focused on those top bits. So what other things should we be definitely seeing within our backup product? Well, on the left-hand side here, you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff. So we should be having flexible backup storage options. Like I want to store it in the cloud, but I also want to store a copy of it in the office. That's one thing, absolutely. I want file level, disk level, image level backups, again, for the technical people. A couple of things that I just want to point out, maybe terms that are might be a bit more unfamiliar. Immutable backups, what that means is that effectively when you put the file on your backup server, it can't ever be changed. That's brilliant in a cybersecurity scenario, for example. So let's say you've got a bad actor, they come into your environment, and the truth is today, what they'll do is if they want to ransomware you, so what I mean by that is they're going to go and encrypt all of your files, let's say, on your server, and then charge you an extortionate amount of typically Bitcoin to unencrypt those files so you have access to them. What they'll tend to do is go for your backups first, because of course, if they don't touch your backups, you're in a position where you can just restore those files that have been maliciously attacked and encrypted. You can pull them back from your backups, and that kind of is pointless for them. So what they'll do is they go for your backups, they'll try and encrypt all your backups, and then they'll encrypt your production environment so that you've got nothing to restore from. So very important that things like immutable backups exist today, because those files can't be then changed. They can't be encrypted effectively in that scenario, but they're cemented in. All right, nothing can change. So immutable backups is something just as standard we expect to see in our backup solution. So it's worth checking that they are there. On top of that, obviously antivirus. We want as a backup goes on, we want to be scanned. We want to make sure that if we ever have to recover, we're not recovering viruses and bits and pieces as well. Okay, so a couple of key things. Basically, your backup product should be covering off kind of retention, how quick it is to restore information, how long we can hold stuff for, how quickly it is to restore that information, restore a server. And all the backup products will differ. They have different abilities, different speeds, and it's very much an investigation for your IT department or engage with us to go and explore what options are right for your business. On the right-hand side, there's a few more advanced bits, and if we just highlight a couple of cool things that are definitely happening in the backup world, maybe your backup product doesn't do today, or maybe you're exploring. Continuous data protection is a really cool thing. So that's pretty much the same as when you're in Office 365 today, love it or hate it, you'll probably find when you're typing a document that's saved in the cloud, what I mean by that is it's in your OneDrive, or it's in your Google Drive, or it's in SharePoint. When you start typing, you'll see the document will save for you automatically. Now that behavior is brilliant. Some people love it, some people hate it. But if you want that behavior, but you're not yet in the cloud, you can't really achieve it. You have to go file, save every time you want to save your documents. Let's take ourselves back 10 years where we were working away on a big document, our computers crashed, we lost all the work we've done in the last 2 hours. This is something that will overcome that, this continuous data protection. What it does is it continually saves, and continually takes backups of the files that you're working on, even if you're not yet in the cloud. So if you like that behavior, auto save, you can achieve that through your backup platform potentially. Okay, so quite a cool tool. You've also got this idea of reporting. Backup products will vary in their reporting. Really important to have a clear understanding of what data you have available to be restored if you ever need it. It's great if you look at your backup report and it says you've got a 98% success rate. Okay, sometimes it won't ever be 100% because files might be locked. Okay, someone's working on it, therefore the backup doesn't run, it doesn't back the file up, or there's some sort of issue, or it's being moved at the time process you ran the backup. And occasionally you'll see failures. Now, if you get a report back that says 98% success, you might go, okay, well, that's cool, that's close enough. There must be a few files that didn't back up for whatever reason. Now, that's great, but if it's one really important file in your business, if it's a file that you absolutely need to make sure you're backing up every night, how do you know if it's in that extra 2% that got missed? And this is where mapping, so data protection maps, are really important. You can basically containerize a bunch of documents or a bunch of information on particular services that you deem to be incredibly important, and you say, I want a report that tells me on a grand scheme we got 98% coverage, but actually I got 100% of my really important documents that I wanted to be backed up. And maybe that's what you care about. Okay, you're not that worried if that text file that somebody created to put some notes in and put on their desktop and then it didn't back up. Do you care if that backs up? If you do, then it's important. Put it in that data map that says really important files. If it isn't, probably don't need it in there. And you're just making sure that all of your real business critical data is being backed up efficiently, and it gives you that visibility. So reporting on backups is very important, because the truth is, this is always an insurance policy. You never know you need it until you go and try and get it out of your backups and it's not there. So very important to map this stuff out and get more visibility than just we're 98% successfully backed up. And then a couple of other things. Obviously, there's been a bit of a shift over the last few years from on-site backup solutions. So if you've got a backup product that you invested in 4 or 5 years ago, you probably want to look at that and make sure that it's got capability to be able to start backing up some of the newer cloud-based technology. So Microsoft 365, for example, is it able to back your mailboxes up? Is it able to back your team sites up? Is it able to back SharePoint up if you're using the Microsoft state? Some products will, some products won't, is the truth. And remember that if you delete a file in Office 365, please don't be fooled into thinking that you're never going to lose it. You can just go and get it back. If you delete that file, it will go into a recycle bin. It will sit there for 90 days and then it will be deleted. If you unlicense a user, so let's say somebody's left within your organization and you unlicense them and you delete their account, it will sit there again for 90 days. And then ultimately, after 90 days, it will delete all their data and you cannot get that back. Okay, so it's still important. Now, let's say a new member of staff starts in that role and 3 months later they need a file. They've been in the role 4 or 5 months. They need a file that their predecessor had. It was in their OneDrive. That's gone. Okay, you're not going to get that back. So really important that you're using 365. If you are, that you still back it up, okay, and you still cover it. And of course, some of the more advanced products can do multiple backups a day. Even better if you're working, again, same point you made earlier about continually changing, continually evolving. Maybe you're working on stuff, deleting it, working on stuff. You want that continual backup through the day. Maybe you received an email at 9 a.m. You accidentally deleted at 1 p.m. Okay, and then that night that backup's not in your email backup. Okay, because it all happened in one day. Whereas if you back up multiple times a day, you'll capture that email. Maybe you accidentally deleted it. You can go back and recover it. So multiple backups a day is also very, very, very important. So backup as a whole, I think we're fairly comfortable with. I'm not going to hang on that too long. Ultimately, there's some great products out there. We should definitely go and look at those. But it's only doing a sub part of what we need. It's covering our data. The next question is, in an event where we have a risk, right, we may have downtime. Something may impact our business that stops our business from running. So in a backup scenario, we had a cyber event. Great, we can use backup to remediate that risk. But there are other risks across our IT estate. And one of those things is the idea of hardware failing, for example. So resilience is the next thing. That kind of takes backup, and then we build on that with resilience. And what we mean by that now is that we're widening our scope a little bit. It's still narrow, but we're widening it slightly to say, well, we've got our backup covered. We know our data's safe. We know that that's secure. But actually, what I'm concerned about now is what happens if something happens that continues to take our business down? What happens if our lease line goes down, if our internet connection goes, if the servers fail, if our firewall breaks? What things within the IT estate could cause an outage outside of a ransomware attack or a backup issue or someone deleting a file? Things go wrong, right? If they didn't, we wouldn't be here, or I certainly wouldn't be here if IT didn't fail regularly. So the important thing is that how do we remediate? How do we create a plan to ensure that we minimize our risk with IT outages? And this is where resilience is. Again, probably owned by the IT manager, in all honesty, but focused in on services. So what's resilience? Let's take an example here, right? This is the normal mapping of a user at their desktop on the left-hand side. And you may or may not know, but a PC is typically wired into something called a switch, which is the next icon across, a network device. That's typically connected to the same network as the servers, which is where you're serving up files and folders and information. If you've still got things on-prem, I appreciate many of you on the call probably may not have servers anymore, maybe are completely cloud-based. But you will probably be going through a firewall as the next step, and then onto your internet line, and then out onto the internet. So this is all great, and assuming that all that stuff runs, you're absolutely fine. But if any one of those pieces fail, you could find yourself in a situation where your business can't operate. So if the server goes down, you may not be able to get on the internet. There's nothing wrong with the internet line, but the services running from the server are stopping you from getting to the internet line. If the firewall goes down, again, similar story. The internet line's absolutely fine, but that piece of hardware in the firewall, that's stopping people from getting into your network effectively, to keep it simple. If that goes down, you still, again, can't get on the internet. You know, if the switch goes down, the first device, it's going to affect potentially a bank of devices inside your business. Now, that might be fine, might not be the end of the world, but it might be the sales team, it might be the operational team, it might be delivery team, whatever. And if it's fundamental to your business that those machines are always on and available and able to access the network, then it's a higher risk than it is maybe if it's a department that doesn't rely on IT so much. So how do we overcome that? Well, resilience is the idea of bringing in multiple versions of the same thing. Now, I appreciate there's a cost to this, okay? I'm not suggesting for a second that it's right just to go out and buy 2 of everything. But what we're saying here at a high level is that one way to remediate the risk of a piece of hardware failing is to buy another one. And what I generally mean in that scenario is not always that if it fails, we'll unplug it and we'll put another one in. It's to have things automatically fail over and to basically kick in the event something goes wrong. And this is where we get the idea of primary and secondary devices. For the technical people, active, passive, right? All these ideas are concepts around building resilience within your infrastructure. And all this is, again, owned by the IT manager at this point. So the idea is that if we were to lose our internet line, because now I had one line, if it went down, no one's getting the internet. So let's get a second line. That means that if line 1 goes down, everything just kicks into line 2 and we carry on running. Brilliant, no worries at all. And again, with your server estate, lots of you may be aware of things like VMware and Hyper-V, and virtualization technology. And the idea of that is you have multiple bits of hardware. And should a single piece of hardware fail, all these virtual machines and your services slide to another and everything carries on running. And the key here with resilience is really should be transparent to the end user. You've done a good job there if the end user doesn't even know it's happened. All right, if the internet line went down and no one knew, you've got a good resilience solution in place. If the servers fail and no one knows, you're in a good resilience situation. But there's a cost required here, right? You're going to have to buy 2 of things. But you've got to ask yourself, what's more expensive? And we can't answer that question for you. So is the cost of being down for 3 hours more expensive than buying a new firewall, buying a second firewall? And that will differ from business to business to business. So the answer is there's no right or wrong answer, okay? It depends on your business, depends on your cost of downtime and the impact that it can have on your business. It may be that it doesn't matter if the internet goes down for you, as long as the servers stay up and running, then we don't care about that. In which case, we'll look at investing in creating resilience just for the servers piece, not the whole thing. You don't need to worry about the line. In most cases, it's the other way around. In most cases, people can't really operate nowadays without an internet line into the building. So actually, you generally see multiple internet lines coming in rather than multiple other bits of hardware, just a shift in the market. So let's put that into a real world scenario. We've got now multiple lines. So we've got a little school here, and there's their internet line. Fantastic. They've got one line. Everyone's getting on the internet. No problem at all. And we know, based on what we just said a moment ago, that should that line go down, they're going to lose internet. And therefore, it's an educational establishment in this scenario. So therefore, no one's learning, right? Because a lot of educational content is online today. So, of course, the natural choice is to build some resilience in there, put another line in. Okay, that might be the story over, but I'm sure most of the techies on the call are screaming at me going, well, it's not quite that simple, Scott. So, and you're absolutely right. There's more to it than I'm letting on at this point, because of course, if I get 2 lines, let's say they're both with the same provider, the chances are they both go back to the same exchange locally, okay, the same BT exchange somewhere. And of course, if something happens in that BT exchange, if there's a flood or there's some sort of BT outage, then the truth is both your lines are going to go off. So what resilience have you actually built in at that point? The answer is not a lot. So we introduced the idea of things like diverse routing. So what we mean by that is go and get two lines from different providers and make sure they're routed into your building in separate ways. If they both come in the same duct, there's a risk there. Okay, the risk is that a furry little friend is going to come along and bite through both of those cables because they're both sat next to each other, in which case you've lost both your lines. So making sure one comes into the front of your building and one into the back of your building or wherever will mitigate some of that risk. So, and really it's important to say as well that the provider you choose is quite important as well. You know, if you go and take a service from, let's say, Sky Broadband and BT, the chances are that both of those circuits actually all run across a BT network, okay? But actually, if you go and look at somebody like BT that run their own copper infrastructure across the country, and fibre now to be fair, and Virgin, for example, you may be aware that that's slightly different technology. Virgin run their own fibre optic network in the country, BT run another, their own fibre optic network. Chances are if there's a BT outage, it's not going to hit your Virgin environment. If there's a Virgin outage, it's not going to hit your BT environment. For example, there's lots of providers out there. I'm not necessarily recommending those two, certainly not recommending one of them. So, but there are options, okay, around what you can do. But when you think about this resilience, it's not as simple as let's just get another line in. Okay, there is some requirements and planning required, and that's why it continues to be owned by the IT department still as it stands today. Right. So where do we end up with DR then? You remember we had backup, then we had resilience, and then we had this concept of DR. So what's DR? DR very often gets confused with business continuity. But DR, to make it really clear, DR is the focus around IT, and business continuity is a focus around your organization, events that happen that could impact your business as a whole. DR is really primarily concerned with restoring your IT infrastructure, okay? And importantly, how quickly it can bring it back. And now we're going way beyond the idea of just backing up your files and folders with DR, all right? We're going way beyond the idea of resiliency with DR. In fact, the truth is that you could call DR an extension of resiliency. A moment ago, we talked about the failure of an individual hardware component, a firewall, an internet line, or whatever. What we're talking about with DR is the failure of your entire IT system. And what we really want it to do is just fail over the whole IT system to somewhere else. So this example is what failover means, and that's the key component of DR. Here we've got a PC, we've got some servers and some switches, some infrastructure, shall we say. It's probably running on-premise in the office somewhere. And the idea with DR is that we're going to lift copies of all of our infrastructure. So all of our servers, all of our platforms that we use, assuming they're not hosted in the cloud, anything's running on-prem, we're going to lift, we're going to copy, and we're going to take image-based copies of all of this environment, and we're going to move them to somewhere that isn't in our office. Now, that might be a data center, that might be Azure, it might be a cloud platform from a backup provider. The key here being that in the event of an outage, I've always got a pretty much up to date, within the minute, copy of all of the data that's running in my production environment. And should an issue occur and my infrastructure goes down, I just flick a button and it all spins up in another environment. And again, all the IT people on the call going, Scott, it is not that easy. You're absolutely right. But it depends on the product, if I'm honest with you. But in many cases, there are things to do. Hopefully, I don't sort of bore you all with IP addresses might need to change. ARC caches need clearing on switches to get devices to see those new IPs. There's lots of things that need to happen in the background. I totally acknowledge that. But if you find the right products, certain products can stretch VLANs, can match IP address ranges. So actually, it's seamless to the end user. So again, in this scenario, we've reached out to Acronis just to say, hey, what should we expect as standard in DR and what's kind of advanced in a DR scenario? So here's some standard stuff. We're expecting any DR product that you may use to be looking at your virtual servers. We're looking at physical servers. We're looking at that IT infrastructure, being able to lift that over, create copies of all that data in another data center. They should probably provide the data center infrastructure for you to run it in. It will probably have a cost all the time that you are running that infrastructure in a DR scenario. But ultimately, it's looking for how do we take our failed units, spin it up over here in another environment, right? Fairly straightforward stuff. But there are a few other things that I just want to highlight when you start to think about DR and spinning your infrastructure up somewhere else. It's very important that that infrastructure you spin up to is secure. Now, let's say that you've just been, you've had a fire in the office, okay? All of your servers, all of your infrastructure is on fire, and it's causing massive downtime for the business. Great news. I'll, for the sake of Acronis, we'll say you've spun this stuff up in your Acronis cloud environment. Very important that that environment is secure, because you've got a fire, your business is down, you're losing money, you know, and you're waiting for this platform to come up over here. Great news, you spin it all up. The problem is, it's not very secure. The firewalls haven't been patched for 5 months because no one really cares about the DR environment. The images that we're keeping aren't necessarily up to date potentially. The access to it is not secure. It doesn't require MFA to get into the DR environment, but it does in our production environment, but we just never set it up in DR because we never really thought we were going to end up in DR. And now it's all a bit of a mad panic and a mad rush. Problem is that let's say everything's on fire over here, business is down, great news, you've spun it all up in DR, and then you get a cyber attack in your DR environment. Okay, now your DR environment's down as well. Okay, so you need to think about risk as your production environment, but also your DR environment. And whatever state, if we take DR out of it, let's say we're not spinning servers up, there's still a cybersecurity consideration for whatever your business looks like when it's not running on its production environment. Okay, you are exposed, and you need to make sure you're looking at it. And the truth is, a lot of people don't look at that DR piece because it's an insurance policy. It's very unlikely to happen. If it does happen, we'll sort it out at the time. So secure failover, very, very important. Automated recovery runbooks, another great thing, right? Do you know what you've actually got to do in a DR scenario? Okay, if you sat your IT manager down, they'll go, yep, I'm pretty sure I've got to go bang, 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 get everything up, spinning up and running, get it all over. And yes, absolutely, I would hope that everybody on the call that's technical has a pretty clear idea of how they're going to get their environment running in the DR scenario if they need to. But you can speed that process up. It might take 6 hours, but I know what I've got to do, right? We can speed this up using what we call runbooks. These are automated scripts which basically say, I'm gonna take a copy, I'm gonna spin this up, I need to make sure that certain servers are on before other servers, otherwise I'll get communication issues, etc., etc., etc. And that allows us to go from maybe 6 hours to maybe 20 minutes to spin those servers up, because we haven't got to think about it, right? It's gonna boot up. Another massive thing to think about is, great, you've got everything spun over into your DR environment, and let's say your building was on fire, so it's out of commission now for a month, 2 months. No worries, insurance hopefully is paying out, everything's being gutted, refitted, new servers are turning up. So great, you've got your new servers, you've put them all in the IT cupboard, and ultimately now you're in a situation where you need to turn everything back on again. But the issue is everybody for the last 2 months has been working in the DR area, okay, and all the files and all the folders and all the modifications have happened in the DR side. So now we need to get all those changes back again. We need a few options. One might just be to back them up and restore them onto new hardware. Another option might be to click a button and have it all just restore back again, okay, onto this hardware. And some of the more advanced backup products and DR solutions will allow you to do that. So fail over is the idea of going from a broken production system to your backup DR environment. Fail back is from your DR environment back to a production environment when everything's sorted. All right, and the last thing to do is test it, right? Because test it regularly, because at least once a year, but I would encourage you to do it more if you can. The end point being, do you actually know what's going to happen? All right, when that production system breaks, if you haven't tested that and it doesn't spin up in DR, then what are you going to do? You've promised, if you're an IT manager, you've promised your boss, yeah, we'll have the system back up and running in 2 hours. And of course, if it's 2 or 3 days later, the cost of downtime is significantly higher than the 2 hours that maybe the MD was expecting. So you might get in a bit of trouble. So it's important to test that regularly. And again, some of the more advanced systems will give you automated tools that will allow you to spin the DR platform up in the background without affecting the production environment, and making sure that these things boot up and they don't blue screen, and that there's communication between services, etc., etc. So lots of things that we can talk about with DR as we go through it. But I just want to kind of loop back then, all right, about some of the things that we talked about. So we've got backup, resilience, and DR. Backup being the most basic entry level, resilience being really requiring some investment, okay, and DR But all of these things at this point have probably been owned by the IT manager. Certainly backup would have done. Certainly resilience probably was. And disaster recovery, well, that might have been owned by perhaps an IT director, perhaps someone on the leadership team that has responsibility for IT. And the reason I say that is that if you're breaking into a DR environment, there's probably communication, there's probably comms that needs to go out to employees, there's probably a chain of events and processes that need to be followed. That probably needs to be reported back to the managing director. There's probably decisions to be made about when we fail over to DR. So, but ultimately, these are all IT things. Now, when we talk about risk to business, it's not all about IT. Okay, there are a whole load of risks to business that have got nothing to do with IT. And this is the bit I want to focus on now, is that business continuity is not about IT. It's about risk to business. It's about if something happens in any eventuality, how do we as a business react? What's the plan? How can we forecast events that we think could be a risk to our business? And it covers not just IT, it covers your supply chain potentially. What happens if a supplier goes bust? What happens if a supplier has an IT issue? Does it affect you? Human resources, staff shortages, all sorts of things that are risks within the business. But the truth is that there might be an answer in the IT side of it to some of these issues. So, but of course, the big difference here is this is owned by the leadership team, generally, right? It's not the IT manager's responsibility to write a business continuity plan. And that's where it gets confusing, okay? And I just want to make it really clear. Your IT manager, your IT director, maybe on their own, are not able to write a business continuity plan. It requires everybody across the business. It requires a senior leader with visibility of the whole organization to be able to define what those risks are. So here we've got a little diagram. The things on the right, cyber attacks, power outages, broadband failure. Well, let's take those things. They are pretty much all IT things on the right-hand side. And we talked about how we could potentially reduce our risk of a cyber attack by a couple of things. One, making sure we've got good cybersecurity tools in place, EDRs, etc., mail phishing awareness, etc. But ultimately, if it does happen, we could use backup to help us get back from a cyber attack. Power outages. Well, okay, if the power's gone down in the office, then we could use a DR environment to spin our server estate up in another location, meaning that we can remediate that risk slightly because we've got a plan in place if the office has no power for 3 or 4 days. Broadband failure, we talked about resilience there. So in the event of a line going down, let's get a second line. Let's make sure it's diversely routed. Let's make sure it's from a different provider, and so on and so on and so on. So all of the things on the right-hand side are very much IT based. So definitely fall under the realm of backup, resilience, or disaster recovery. The things on the other side are not obviously anything to do with IT. It's not IT's fault that there's a biblical flood kicking into the area that's knocking out all the businesses, right? If you're in the engineering world and maybe one of your milling machines is broken, again, may be part of IT's responsibility, may not be, might be somebody else's. The access issues, so let's say that's door entry system, access into the buildings, again, that might be owned by IT, but it might also be owned by facilities. So, and these are all risks, all right? They're still risks. What happens if your office gets flooded? Have you got a plan? Do you send everybody home? And if you do send everybody home, how do they work? Oh, and actually, suddenly we're back at a conversation of how are they going to work? Well, they need IT. So maybe this is an IT problem. If the door entry system in the office doesn't work because people can't get in, how are you going to remediate that? Okay, well, no one can get in the office, so everyone's going to work from home. Okay, well, again, we're back at this IT conversation, aren't we? So what you may find over time is that actually all of these things don't really need to be split apart. All right, if you're thinking about a DR plan, I recommend you just don't worry about the DR side of it. If it is, it's a plan that sits within the IT department. But if you're thinking about it from a business perspective, you need to be talking about a business continuity plan and considering all risks. Because whilst you have risks like natural disasters and supply chain issues and bits and pieces, there's the possibility that IT has some answers for you. How do you mitigate a supply chain issue? Well, maybe you send your suppliers questionnaires asking about their cybersecurity posture, what their backup platform is, how can you measure how effective they are? What's the risk to you if they haven't managed their own internal risk? Now, it's not an uncommon thing. I'm sure many of us have had kind of forms and bits and pieces to fill in from our suppliers, ensuring, or up the chain, ensuring that we're in a position where we can do those. We can deliver services to our customers, right? So the bit of takeaway is that this doesn't change, right? This is all business continuity, but business continuity may have baked into it some backup requirements, some resilience requirements, some disaster recovery requirements. All of those three things bake into a business continuity plan, as well as all the other business concerns and risks. So if we deviate away slightly from IT for a second, because we're talking about business continuity now, so we're talking as leaders of the business, there are lots of things that we know are a risk, all right? And if we are an ISO accredited organization, you probably have a risk register. If you're not an ISO, you might have one as well. I didn't mean it like that, but my point is that ultimately you may have somewhere in your business a risk register. If you're ISO, you've got to have one. And that is basically a detail of all the things that you think could be a risk to business. And it might be that the head of your ops team isn't available. The managing director goes sick for a few months. Okay, what impact does that have on the business? Might be that we can't get in the building. Well, then that's already part of your business continuity plan. So the truth is you may have already got half of this stuff worked out. The question is, how do you take that risk and work out how to mitigate it? All right, and how do we communicate that across the business and ensure the right people are doing it? But there are lots of different types of risk, right? None of us saw in this scenario, none of us saw the pandemic coming, okay? And we always go on about the pandemic, but it's just something everyone can associate with, right? That is very much an external factor. Certainly not IT's fault, okay? Although I'm sure there's plenty of IT people that got shouted at over the pandemic. But ultimately, no one can see that coming. We're in the SME kind of industry. We're looking at next month, we're looking at the month after, okay? We're not planning for a pandemic, okay? I understand it. Lots of people will not have had a business continuity plan, assuming that the whole planet was going to be shut down. So there's always going to be unknowns that we're not prepared for. But the important thing to think about there is the people that really excelled during the pandemic were actually, in many cases, it really hurt some businesses and it really helped some businesses. So certain businesses that were in the healthcare industry obviously boomed for obvious reasons. But some of those startups that didn't have any legacy on-premise equipment, for example, were able to just adopt the cloud. Everyone went home, carried on working, and it really made no difference at all. Obviously, they excelled in that environment because they were fortunate. I think some of them may have planned to do this, but I think a lot of them were fortunate. Now, that's why the cloud is being adopted so quickly today. You know, a lot of this is to allow anybody to work from anywhere, and that is part of your business continuity plan. Part of the risk might be to mitigate something like this, where connectivity is affected, where people can't socialize and talk to each other. Maybe that plan is to look at cloud technologies. There's another great example. So Wimbledon, effectively, they didn't hold Wimbledon during the pandemic. And obviously, as you can imagine, that's one event that happens every year. And if they don't make any money, that's a huge hole in their pocket. They've got pandemic insurance since the game started for like the last 100 years. They never had, like, who thought they were going to have a pandemic? I suppose it might have come off the back of the Black Death and things like that, whatever. But ultimately, they've had insurance, and we've had two massive pandemics in the last 100 years. Now, obviously, it didn't hurt them, didn't hit their pocket. But I'm not suggesting that in the SME world, we all need to go out and buy pandemic insurance. That's a decision. Maybe it is really important to you. But this is the whole point of this conversation, is that I can't tell you what's an important risk to your business, only you can. Only you can understand the value of downtime. Only you can understand the value of that risk. So if it's important, go and get it. Maybe that's how you're going to mitigate that risk for you. Another example is, so we've got these external factors, right? Another thing would be just making a decision at a company level that has an impact. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a period a few years ago, I think, where KFC ran out of chicken, all right? So their only job is to deliver fried chicken, and they changed their supplier. And obviously, there's long-term benefits to that. There's some great reasons. They were going to save money, I'm sure. There was going to be a better, faster operation. It was going to be X, Y, and Z. Problem is it crippled their business because the new supplier couldn't meet the demand, and KFC stores all over the country and all over the world, in fact, suddenly couldn't sell chicken. They closed, they lost money, the impact was huge. Now, again, not really related to IT in that scenario, but it's still a risk. And it's a risk that you should put in your business continuity plan. What happens if we run out of chicken? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But what happens if you have a supply chain problem is the actual thing that we're putting under there. What do we do as a business? How do we change our direction? How do we pivot to make sure the business continues? And then there's the third piece, which is IT, and it is fundamental to it. Don't get me wrong, the business continuity, probably one of the most likely issues you're going to have within your business that's going to impact the operation is IT, and not necessarily your IT, could be your supplier's IT. So 2 examples here. We know about recently there was a global IT outage that came from the world of CrowdStrike, right, which is a cybersecurity product. And it's installed on lots and lots and lots of devices, all over the world, very, very well adopted product. And they made a mistake. And that mistake resulted in half the planet kind of losing connectivity, or not losing connectivity. Machines would boot up, blue screen, servers not working, businesses were affected, things were down, payments weren't being taken. And of course, just because the payment machine's gone meant that businesses that weren't even affected by CrowdStrike are suddenly being affected by that outage. And it really had nothing to do with them. The sad thing also is that, of course, for the first few hours of that, everyone thought it was Microsoft that had caused an outage. Okay, so you watched Microsoft's share price plummet that morning. Okay, as everybody thought that Microsoft had a glitch and the system had gone down. The brand reputation against Microsoft was huge. Share prices dipped. That, of course, has an impact on people's pockets. But the truth is, it was actually CrowdStrike. It was a supply. So it's very important to note that it's not just about you. You can be affected by IT across the board. Another example is the post office. They got a few years ago again, they were breached in a cyber incident. You may remember it, but they couldn't post anything. Pretty pointless, right? In terms of lots of their courier stuff was unable to work because their courier system was compromised. It was locked down. They couldn't get into it. It took took days and days and days, to interrogate that forensically, to understand how that breach happened, how to mitigate that in the future, and it shut the operation down. They were able to deliver letters, I think, but not parcels or something along those lines. But the end goal being that IT outage caused an issue, caused a risk to the business, and they needed to remediate those things. They clearly didn't have a solution to get that environment up and running over here on the right. They didn't have a DR scenario, for example, to get the system up and running again so that business could carry on running. It was not working for a week or two. So it's very important that IT is considered, okay? But it's as equally important to think about the risks that you make as a leadership team, and it's as equally to think about the risks that other external factors have on your business that are out of your control. And all of these things need to be thought about. How do we build a plan of action to mitigate them? Just to give you a bit of information, we've got kind of a breakdown of typical causes of downtime across the estate. So 34% of the time when there's an outage, it's because of hardware failure. But I gave you an out there earlier with things like resilience. All right, so 34% of the downtime could be mitigated by bringing in a resilient solution. Power loss, 35% of outages caused by power loss. Well, again, there's a solution there, right? That's DR. Bring DR into the conversation and make sure you've got a solution that you can fail over to, or move to the cloud. Because if you've got everything in the cloud, you probably don't need DR, all right? You don't need an environment that you're going to fail over to, because at that point, the services that you're consuming, whether that's Azure or that's all purely Microsoft 365, the vendor has invested their billions of pounds to make those solutions highly redundant, resilient, available. Should there be a global, in many cases, if you're in Azure, if there's a global if there's a territory outage where a whole data center is taken out, you have options to have that fail over to other data centers, okay? So lots of solutions that they've invested in that you do not need to go away and invest in. Software update, 20% of things are caused by software update. That number seemed high to me, and then I realized that CrowdStrike obviously was on there a few weeks ago. So that's probably why, because that was a software update that took out half the planet. Okay, so very important. How to remediate that? Well, that's through process and backup. Okay, accidental data deletion, that's backup. natural disasters, not a lot IT can do about that. But again, all three of those things come into that, backups, DR, and resilience can help mitigate the risk. We can't stop a natural disaster, but we can help get out of that situation quicker, assuming we've got very good planned process to do it. And once you understand those risks, once you understand, okay, I know I've got a potential risk. The buildings, the office is on a floodplain. Flooding is an option. Okay, might be the barrier system doesn't work and people can't get their cars in the car park. It could be anything, couldn't it? You think about it. But these things may be detailed on your risk register, and if they're not, have a think about it. Once you do that, the next step to planning a business continuity plan is to say, how do I link all these risks to generally one of these four things? So is this risk linked to providers, people that are providing goods and services to us as a business to allow us to deliver the product or service that we deliver? If that is the case, it links into things about providers. And the heavier, the more things you've got around your providers, kind of tells you need to probably put more investment in that, or you need to think about your processes and are you auditing and checking your suppliers well enough? Your processes are the next thing. What can you change inside your own internal processes to minimize your risk to any of these potential natural disasters and bits and pieces? Maybe those changes are, let's shift to a remote working model. Let's go to the cloud, okay? Let's think about ways of working within our business that don't rely on these potential risk areas. People, another really, really key one, are your employees, safe and effectively able? Are they going to be able to turn up to work? What happens when John doesn't turn up? Does that have an impact? Does it mean that there's a risk associated with your business if individual people are there? I'm sure you probably understand what the way to remediate that is, by knowledge sharing, employing more people, etc., etc. But of course, we're in the SME world. It's not that simple. Can't just go out and employ somebody else. So we need to understand, are there processes that we can put in? Can we think about automation? Can we think about streamlining processes to try and take some of the responsibility away from the individual that could get sick, could get ill, could be off work? And then finally, your premise. So again, this is your building. What can you do to say, if people can't get in the building, does the business continue to run? Do our operations continue? Can we carry on selling? Can we continue to bring money in? And again, there it's remote working. Maybe that's an option. Maybe if we don't want to do remote working, absolutely get it. Maybe your business just simply cannot operate in a remote working capacity. Okay, well, what do we do if the building's gone then? Because the business needs to carry on running. Maybe your answer is we insure ourselves the hill and we all run into the hills. But I'm not saying that is right or wrong, but you need a plan. So talking about plans, what does a plan actually need to have in it from a business continuity perspective? First rule, print it off. Don't leave it as a digital copy sat on your server. Because of course, if your server goes down, no one knows what to do, okay? Because it's online, the server's off, and now you can't get to the business continuity plan. So print it off and keep it in a folder, stick it in the cupboard, stick it in the server room, wherever you like, okay? And probably one of the key things here, if I give you a real example, we step through this, let's think about how we mitigate an internet outage, okay? So we've got a file, we've got our business continuity plan, we've got it stored in Teams, and our internet goes down. But I can't get to Teams now because the internet's down, and I don't know how to get to it. I don't know what I've got to do, right? Maybe I'm the only leadership person in the office at the moment. I didn't look at the DR plan. I was supposed to look at it 6 months ago. I can't even remember what I'm doing. Who do I need to call? What do I need to do? That's your plan, all right? So print it off, stick it somewhere. Make sure everyone knows what it is, okay? In that document, we need the details for all the key stakeholders to get this business up and running again. So we're going to have a grid of our risks, all the things that are going to happen. And I'm going to look at it and go, I've got a whole bunch of risks. I've got I've got flooding. I've got I've got a server outage. I've got a ransomware attack, to keep it in the IT theme, but you can take it out of IT if you want. Maybe one of them is the internet outage. Right, okay, so I've got an internet outage. What have I got to do? Right, I need to speak to the IT director. I need to speak to the IT manager. Okay, how do I do that? Now the internet's down. There's no point trying to get hold of them on Teams because I can't. Maybe I've got 4G, 5G, but maybe I haven't got a company phone, and do you know what? The member of staff that's in there at the time doesn't want to use use their own personal phone. All that kind of stuff that happens. So How do we get hold of them? All right. Do we have a phone number? Do we need to email them? If it's the internet down, then theoretically, if I can get an email out somewhere over 4G, then because I can't get hold of them on the phone, then the internet's still working. Microsoft 365 is still up. It's just my connectivity. So maybe actually emails are perfectly fine in form of communication, whatever it looks like. But in each scenario where we have a risk, it's who. Who owns this? Who's the person that can make a change? There's no point phoning the IT manager if the car park's flooded. That's going to be your facilities person, right? And how do you get hold of them? So it's about having the right person under each risk, all right? How we communicate with them, how do we get hold of them? And then they need to know what to do. Again, if it's the IT manager, at what point do we actually trigger an event? Let's say that we're going to, the internet's gone down. So do we need to fail into DR? Well, no, because the internet's down. It's definitely not going to work. Okay, do we need to come up with some other strategy? Potentially. I'm not sure what that might be at this point. Do we need to fail over to the other line because we've got two lines? Yeah, that's probably the most logical step in your task. Who makes that call? All right, who says that you can fail over to the other line? Probably the IT manager, might be the IT director. Maybe that's effectively a resilient line that we pay for whenever we turn it on. So therefore, there's a cost implication to doing that. Well, now, is it the IT manager's decision? Was that a senior leader's decision? Who makes the calls about what we can do and when? Is there any point, let's say it's 2 o'clock in the morning and your internet line goes down, okay? No one's in the office. So we don't want to just react, do we? We need some time frames in there that says, if the internet line goes down at 2 in the morning, well, we're not worried about that. As long as someone checks it at 6 a.m. and the internet's back up again, we didn't need to do anything around our business continuity plan. If we get to 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning, and we know all of our staff have just started work or about to come into work, then there needs to be a decision made, right? And maybe in the plan, take the responsibility away from the IT manager. It says, if the internet's not up at 6 a.m., fail over to the second line. Done. Everyone knows what they've got to do at that point. So it's about being clear and concise. And probably the last thing is also communication. That's always the thing that goes out the window in a panicked state. Internet's down, everyone starts running around, don't know what to do. Oh, I'm going to go home, I'm just leaving, I'm doing this, etc. What X, Y, and Z. So we need communication with employees so they understand the expectation. Right, internet's gone down, but actually it did that last night. It lasted 3 minutes and everything will be back up again in 3 minutes. Or, so please bear with it, go make a cup of tea. Or actually it's down, I've looked online, or I've looked, however, all right, I've had a phone call to tell me that the internet's not going to be up for 4 hours. In which case, right, we're going to make a decision. Let's communicate that to the employees, right, everybody can go home then. At what point are we sending people home? At what point, the employees want to know what's going on. But not just employees, right? Your customers maybe want to know what's going on. If your service outage causes an outage to them, you can't deliver a service, a product, or whatever, you need to communicate that with them. You need to regularly communicate that with them. But how are you going to do that if you've got no internet? How are you going to get that message out? What's the plan for how you communicate with your customer base or even your suppliers? If the car park's flooded, you need a communication plan to your suppliers to say, there's no point turning up with a big lorry because there's no way you're coming in. So just don't send the delivery and we'll have it tomorrow, X, Y, and Z. So all of these risks are different, but as you can see, a lot of it does loop back to IT. But business continuity is not an IT decision. So I think the point today really is that we were looking to cover off the difference between backup, resilience, DR, business continuity. And business continuity is a conversation that stretches in all sorts of directions. Okay, and whilst we as an IT provider can definitely provide you lots of answers and solutions and ways to help mitigate risk around that business continuity conversation, a lot of it is about understanding your risks to your business that are unique, that are specifically for you and your industry, and also looking at how other people have affected that. So we encourage you to come and have a chat with us. All right, if you are looking at how do I keep my business more secure, we are an IT provider, but obviously we deal with lots and lots of organisations and lots of sectors. So I encourage you to come and have a chat with us. We've also, just as a heads up before I run away and leave you, we've also got another webinar coming up about Outlook Stream and Whiteboard. These are the very fast-paced tips and tricks ones. So we'll take you through loads of cool, funky, interesting things around that. But with that, hopefully that wasn't too boring. And if you've got any questions, feel free to fire away. If you haven't got any questions, you are welcome to go home and leave us all to it. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you on the next webinar. If you've got any questions, fire away and I'll wait here for a few minutes. No problem. You are more than welcome. I'll make the next one more interesting, I promise. Exciting. So yes, absolutely. Someone asked if we will make the slides available. Yeah, absolutely. We will make the slides available. No problem at all. They typically will come out as part of the video. But if you want to engage, if you want to reach out, if you're an existing customer to our account manager or into our info app email address, we're happy to share that information with you. But it will come out on our website. Any more questions? Thoroughly exciting topic, I'm sure. So, right, okay. So I think we're about 2 minutes over the hour. So rather than keep everybody, I will let you all go. Hopefully, I'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye bye.